Imagine standing on top of Mount Everest. You're part of this massive spring season that is generating, well, an unprecedented 1.07 billion rupees in just a matter of weeks. I mean, it's the ultimate symbol of high altitude triumph, right?
Absolutely. It's historic.
But then you look back home and literally billions of dollars in diaspora cash are just entirely gridlocked because a top bank CEO has just been detained by police and the whole lending market is paralyzed by fear.
Yeah, it is. It's the absolute definition of a systemic contrast.
Yeah.
You have these soaring, record-breaking triumphs on one side of the screen, and then on the other, you're staring at this severe, just grinding gridlock in the banks, at the borders, and frankly, right inside the highest halls of power.
Welcome to the Nepali Diaspora Network podcast, your source for news, views, and insights for Nepalese worldwide. Think of us as your audio portal into the most important developments back home. For you listening right now, we are unpacking Week 20 of the Nepali Diaspora Digest, and that covers May 9th through the 15th, 2026. Our mission today for this deep dive is to give you a balanced, really in-depth look at this incredible contrast. We're diving into the cultural highs, the economic roadblocks, and, of course, the political standoffs shaping the global Nepalese experience right now.
And we aren't just looking at the headlines here. We are going to unpack the underlying mechanisms driving these events. We really want to understand how international trade regulations, banking psychology, and constitutional maneuvers actually work.
Yeah.
And why they matter to the global community.
Exactly. So let's begin with the most visible symbols of national success, up on the highest peak in the world. A 14-member Nepalese rope-fixing team officially summited Everest on May 13th.
Yes, they did.
And they opened the route for a staggering 492 foreign climbers this spring season.
Which is exactly where that 1.07 billion rupees in royalty revenue comes from. I mean, it's the most commercially lucrative season the mountain has ever produced for the state.
Wow.
And for the Kumbh region, this revenue is really the economic lifeblood, particularly as the broader tourism sector is, it's still kind of finding its footing post-pandemic.
Right. But I want to look closely at the mechanics of this, though. Because think of Everest as a skyscraper where the internal elevators are completely broken.
Okay, yeah.
The Sherpa community isn't just acting as tour guides, right? They are the structural engineers. They are laying thousands of feet of scaffolding, the physical ropes, every single season, just so the commercial climbers can essentially, take the stairs.
Right.
They take all the initial risk.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, yeah. The entire billion-rupee industry hinges entirely on that 14-member advanced team.
So here is my question. With record revenues pouring in, is the state actually acting as a competent steward of the mountain? Or are they just, cashing the checks while ignoring the physical reality on the ground? Because we hear constantly about the crowding and the waste.
Yeah, that's the big question. The structural reality is that the operational oversight from the government, it just hasn't scaled up with the permit numbers.
Right.
I mean, that 1.07 billion rupees funds a massive portion of the Department of Tourism's entire budget. But look at the physical strain. You have severe bottlenecks at the Hillary Steppet.
Which is terrifying.
Exactly. It's a near-vertical rock face just below the summit, where climbers literally have to wait in line in the death zone. And then you have critical waste management failures down at the South Col, which is the final camp before the summit push.
Oh, wow.
So the state is benefiting massively from the Sherpa community's expertise, but the reinvestment into the safety and, the environmental sustainability of the mountain is severely lagging.
It is a really precarious balance between survival and sustainability. But high altitude isn't the only place where Nepalese talent is carrying the national brand right now.
No, it's not.
Down in the Kathmandu Valley at Kirtipur, the Rhinos, the national cricket team, are hosting the United States and Scotland in a massive associate nation tri-series.
And this goes far beyond just a friendly exhibition. Every single match in this tri-series feeds directly into the International Cricket Council rankings and, the complex qualification routes for the next World Cup.
E-energy in Kirtipur is just electric. You have crowds of over 15,000 packing the Tribhuvan University International Cricket Ground on a random Wednesday.
It's incredible to watch.
But the real headline is individual performance. Two Nepalese batters, Asif Sheikh and Dipendra Singh Airy, have simultaneously cracked the ICC ODI Top 100 rankings for the very first time. Sheikh is sitting at 93, and Airy is right behind him at 99.
But what is truly fascinating about this development is how cricket has evolved in the cultural consciousness. If you go back, say, a decade or two, football was the undisputed king of the urban sporting landscape.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, cricket has functionally eclipsed it. For the global Nepalese diaspora, whether they're working in the Gulf, studying in Australia, or living in the U.S., cricket has become this massive, binding cultural anchor.
Yeah, they're setting their alarms for 3 a.m. to stream these matches.
Exactly. It creates a shared point of absolute pride across time zones.
And that shared pride is actually translating into tangible institutional support abroad. The diaspora isn't just waking up early to watch the rhinos, they are actively fielding the future of the sport.
Yes.
The 6th edition of the British Gurkha Cricket League, the BGCL, just kicked off on May 10th in the UK.
The BGCL is a phenomenal case study in how the diaspora builds parallel institutions.
Right.
This started years ago as a very modest, informal weekend tournament purely for ex-Gurkha regimental families.
Yeah.
But today, it has evolved into a structured 40-over format, multi-division league spread all across England.
Students, NHS workers, local business owners, they all gather at the boundary ropes. And it's become a vital feeder system. Players coming out of the BGCL are now actually getting scouted for the national team and the domestic Nepal Premier League.
It's amazing.
But the diaspora is exporting far more than just athletic talent. They're the single biggest financial engine for the country. Okay, let's unpack this. Remittances have surged 39.1% year over year.
That's a massive jump.
In just the first 9 months of the fiscal year, they hit an astonishing 1.65 trillion rupees. That translates to 11.55 billion US dollars. For you listening, think about that scale.
The sheer scale of that number, it really requires a shift in how we think about the national economy. The diaspora is no longer just some external support system. By several macroeconomic measures, they functionally are the economy.
Yes.
And Kathmandu is finally being forced to formalize that reality. President Ramchandra Podel recently unveiled a new infrastructure financing model that explicitly names diaspora capital as a core pillar, standing right alongside the private sector and alternative finance.
But wait, I need to stop you there.
Sure.
For decades, Kathmandu has essentially treated the global diaspora like an ATM. They take their remittances, but they don't offer much in terms of systemic rights or protections. Why would the diaspora just hand over a blank check for infrastructure now?
Well, they won't. And that is exactly what makes this moment different. The ATM just woke up and demanded the PN code back.
I love that.
The diaspora is weaponizing its remittances to demand actual policy changes. You see this really clearly with the Non-Resident Nepali Association, the NRNA.
Right.
The NRNA Australia chapter, which is incredibly influential, just officially backed the Balin Shah government's FY 2026-27 policy, specifically praising the movement on property rights and diaspora-targeted financing instruments.
But they attached some very heavy conditions to that backing, didn't they?
Precisely. They demanded transparent legal frameworks and strong institutional mechanisms before any capital actually moves. Right now, there is a highly controversial NRN draft bill circulating in Parliament that many find regressive regarding citizenship and property.
So they're holding their ground.
Yeah. By setting these strict conditions, NRNA Australia is leveraging their financial power to say, show us the actual legal mechanics. We are done with political speeches.
We are also seeing a new draft immigration law from the Home Ministry currently open for a 7-day public comment period. It touches heavily on visas and work permits.
Right.
If you are listening to this and you run a business in Nepal or travel back frequently, this directly impacts your operational reality. It is a critical moment to weigh in.
Because the global community is transitioning from just sending money to demanding a seat at the regulatory table.
But here is the paradox. The diaspora is pumping 1.65 trillion rupees into the country. That cash enters the system, but then it hits a brick wall. The internal economic plumbing is severely clogged.
Yeah, it really is.
Which brings us to the massive banking shockwave that hit this week. Jyoti Prakash Pandey, the CEO of Nepal Investment Megabank, or NIMB, was taken into custody by the Central Investigation Bureau, the CIB, on May 14th.
Now, NIMB is a titan in the commercial lending space. To see a sitting CEO of a top-tier Nepalese bank detained is exceptionally rare.
Really rare.
The CIB, which handles complex financial crimes and high-level corruption, they do not usually make a move like this without a serious predicate. But the timing is what makes this so incredibly volatile for the broader economy.
Help me understand this, though. If the diaspora is flooding the country with $11 billion, shouldn't the banks be flush with cash and eager to lend? Why are we seeing deposits ballooning to 7.9 trillion rupees? But credit flow is completely stagnant at 5.87 trillion. The money is just sitting there.
It comes down to banking psychology and a crisis of confidence. When the CIB arrests a high-profile CEO, it creates a psychological freeze across the entire sector.
So everyone gets scared.
Exactly. Other bank executives instantly get defensive. They tighten their risk parameters. They basically stop approving loans because no one wants to be the next target of an investigation.
Right.
So businesses can't get capital to grow even though the banks are hoarding cash. The Nepal Rashtra Bank, the central bank, has been trying to manage this by mopping up the excess liquidity. Just this week, they drained 40 billion rupees using a 21-day deposit collection instrument.
Wow.
But a central bank can only adjust mathematical liquidity, right?
Yeah.
It cannot mandate confidence. When executives are afraid, lending stops and the gridlock deepens.
And that gridlock extends far beyond the boardrooms. It is happening at the physical borders, and the mechanics of it are just brutal for local farmers. A new standard operating procedure from the Tea Board of India just went into effect.
Right.
Every single truck carrying Nepalese tea now has to divert to Kolkata for individual laboratory testing.
Which takes a border crossing that should literally happen in hours and turns it into a 10 to 15-day delay for every single consignment.
Imagine trying to deal with that. Think about the physics of that. You are trying to sell fresh, premium produce. The high-value spring flush is just coming off the gardens in Ilam and Japa.
Yep.
And the border authorities force your trucks to park in the blazing heat of Kolkata for 2 weeks waiting for a lab result. The product degrades, the contracts fall through, and it is economically lethal for the farmers. But is this really just about lab testing and quality control?
It is highly unlikely to be purely about quality control. This is a classic example of diplomatic protectionism. When you look at the broader context, India also just announced a sweeping ban on sugar exports through September 2026. That is going to severely squeeze Nepalese wholesalers right as they try to stock up for the autumn festival season.
So what does this all mean for Nepal-India relations? The tea testing is just a deliberate friction tactic.
Exactly. It is economic friction being utilized as political leverage. India is pulling these levers to communicate displeasure, very likely tied to broader geopolitical postures in Kathmandu, including the ongoing tensions over the Lipulekh border dispute.
Which is a strategically vital territorial trijunction between Nepal, India, and China.
Precisely.
We did see a few pockets where the gridlock actually broke this week, though. Down in Padrapur, the new Customs Regulation 2026 went into effect. And it isn't just a policy on paper, it is fundamentally altering the incentive structure at the border.
How so?
Well, by tightening enforcement and adjusting tariffs, it makes smuggling riskier and less profitable, which has already pushed informal traders into the light. It's actually boosted formal taxable sales by 30 to 40%.
Now, that is a perfect example of a mechanism working exactly as intended. We also saw construction officially begin on the 132 kilovolt Miyagdi corridor transmission line.
Oh, right.
It's a 16-kilometer project that will finally tie 3 isolated hydropower plants into the national grid.
But, and this is a big but, the World Bank's country head, David Sislin, injected a very sobering statistic into the discourse this week. He pointed out that the government only spent 59% of its capital budget last year.
Meaning 4 out of every 10 rupees allocated to actually build the country roads, hospitals, infrastructure simply sat in the treasury unused due to bureaucratic paralysis.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the ultimate source of all this friction. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The economic gridlock we are seeing at the borders and in the banks is a direct mirror of a slow-motion political standoff currently paralyzing the highest levels of government. The cabinet just resent the Constitutional Council ordinance back to President Ram Chandra Paudel.
And they returned it without changing a single syllable.
Let's break down how this mechanism actually works for our listeners, because it dictates the balance of power in the country. The Constitutional Council is the body responsible for recommending individuals for the most powerful independent offices in the state.
Right, like the Chief Justice, the election commissioners, and the chief of the CIAA, which is the main anti-corruption watchdog.
Historically, making these appointments required a broad consensus. The quorum rules meant you needed members of the opposition present to make a decision, which prevented one party from just, packing the courts and commissions with loyalists.
Exactly.
But the Balin Shah government introduced an ordinance to change those rules. The ordinance effectively lowers the threshold for a quorum. Now, to be completely impartial here, the government argues that this is absolutely necessary. They claim the opposition simply refuses to show up to meetings, creating a gridlock that leaves critical state offices entirely empty. They say they need the lower quorum to bypass the obstruction and keep the state functioning.
Conversely, The critics and the opposition, they argue that lowering this threshold removes vital checks and balances.
Right.
It allows the executive branch to unilaterally appoint judges and anti-corruption chiefs without any oversight, which they view as very dangerous concentration of power.
So when the Balin Shah government first sent this ordinance to Sheetal Niwas, the president's residence, President Patel rejected it and sent it back for reconsideration. By sending it back unchanged, the cabinet is essentially daring the president to block them again.
And under Nepalese constitutional convention, if an ordinance is returned unchanged, the president is generally expected to issue it.
But this standoff is the first major stress test of how traditional institutional power reacts to a non-traditional executive.
It's a huge moment.
It is defining the structural relationship between the president's office and Singha Durbar, the seat of the government. And while that constitutional drama plays out, the National Assembly is intensely debating the government's policies and programs for the upcoming FY 2026-27. Finance Minister Swarnam Wagle is anchoring the debate with a very clear, very marketable mantra: execute, don't announce.
The policy document serves as the philosophical scaffolding before the actual numbers of the budget are released later in May. It covers everything from federal to province, revenue transfer formulas to the diaspora financing instruments we discussed earlier.
But the shadow of that World Bank statistic is hanging heavy over the room. I mean, how do you stand at the podium and promise an era of execution when the state failed to spend 41% of its infrastructure budget last year?
And that is the exact metric the diaspora needs to monitor. If you are an NRN withholding investment until transparent legal frameworks are established, this National Assembly debate is your canary in the coal mine.
Right.
Can the government actually push Wagle's ambitious policies through the bureaucracy, or will they be suffocated by the same institutional friction?
Before we wrap up the analysis, there are a few other critical developments regarding the domestic safety net that really require attention. Cleanliness Week 2026 just launched from the Prime Minister's office. This isn't just about sweeping streets. It's an initiative targeting clean governance and file processing efficiency across all federal and provincial offices.
We also saw a major victory for campus politics. The Supreme Court issued an interim order blocking authorities from dissolving university student organizations, protecting what is essentially a vital training ground for the country's future political leadership.
Right. And on the diplomatic front, Vice President Ram Sahay Prasad Yadav met with EU Ambassador Veronique Lorenzo to mark 52 years of ties, heavily discussing expanded European cooperation in rural development and health infrastructure.
But, while we talk about courting international development for long-term health projects, there are immediate glaring gaps in the domestic safety net today that are being severely overlooked.
Yeah.
The Kathmandu Post published a really sobering report this week revealing that Nepal's only dedicated mental hospital is operating completely beyond its capacity.
It is a stark reminder of the chronic, historical underinvestment in the country's mental health infrastructure. While we rightly celebrate the incredible triumphs on the cricket pitch and the summit of Everest, the foundational social safety nets required to support the most vulnerable citizens are stretched to the absolute breaking point.
Yeah, they really are.
It brings us right back to that split screen we talked about at the start, the staggering heights and the systemic gridlock. Before we leave you today, I want to share a quick resource. If you are listening from the UK, or perhaps you are planning a move there for study or work, make sure you keep belayat.uk bookmarked on your browser.
It's a great site.
It really is. It is a genuinely helpful, community-focused classifieds platform, whether you are looking for local jobs, housing, Nepalese community events, or just trying to find a local Nepali-owned business. It is an incredibly useful tool designed specifically for the diaspora in Britain. That is belayat.uk.
And, platforms like that are exactly how the diaspora builds the foundational community networks that eventually scale up into massive initiatives, like the cricket leagues we discussed earlier.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening across the globe, make sure you head over to nepalidiaspora.net. You can read the full Week 20 digest we covered today, subscribe to get the latest updates directly in your inbox, and dive into a wealth of resources designed specifically for the global Nepalese community.
As we close out this deep dive, I just want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time today analyzing that 1.65 trillion rupee remittance figure. The diaspora has undeniably become the single largest financial engine keeping the nation running. Historically, whether you look at the American Revolution or modern state building, massive financial contribution inevitably leads to a demand for representation. The ATM-PIN analogy is apt. So the lingering question is this: Are we rapidly approaching a tipping point where Nepalese living abroad will no longer just demand property rights, but will demand and achieve direct, structural political voting power over how their home country is actually governed?
Man, is the ultimate question of leverage. You look at that split-screen reality, the incredible potential of the Nepalese people when they are empowered, versus the grinding gridlock of a bureaucracy struggling to keep pace. The global diaspora might just be the sheer force required to finally bridge those two realities. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next one.